Okay. Let's bow in. So this is the real start for this course. We're going to be working our way once again through the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma. This is a 3-volume set. We're on volume 1, called The Path of Individual Liberation. This is a digest, these 3 volumes, of talks given by Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche over the course of about 13 years. Beginning in 1973, every year he would take a group of students, anywhere from 150 to 250 or so, away for 3 months and for what was called Vajradhatu Seminary. And during those 3 months, he would teach the Hinayana teachings, that's the lesser vehicle, or so-called, he preferred to call it the foundational vehicle, and the Mahayana teachings, the greater vehicle teachings, and the Vajrayana teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. Each devoting a month to each. At these seminaries, people would be sitting and practicing. There would always be alternate periods of intense sitting, so might start with a week or 10 days of solid sitting every day, and then go into a similar period of study and practice, and then go back and do some more pure sitting for some days, and then back into a period of some days of sitting and practice, and then so forth, back and forth, so that they got these study periods of on 3 yanas, the 3 vehicles. Yana means vehicle in Sanskrit. Takpa.
Oops. I think your computer just locked up. Val, maybe give him a holler. Tell him to switch to his tablet or something. This technology is great when it actually works, but
John will be back momentarily. He's going to his iPad.
we should have one of those test patterns like they used to put up in the old TVs. Stand by.
So while we're waiting, can I offer a comment on something he said?
Sure.
So these 3-month, what do you call them? Sessions. What if people are living that they could afford to be away for so long? Was it just the 60s where people just lived on nothing? Is that how it was?
It was easier to do that in those days. And also, there were mostly young people who didn't have, families, houses, and all of that. And I think it was easier to do that back then. I can't imagine it being successful now.
Sounds like great training, though. Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I have a friend who attended one and told me that it saved his life.
Yeah.
Here's John. You have to unmute. Oops, you're muted.
So I'm having computer problems. I apologize. I'm on an iPad now. And so to work. So we're talking about the seminaries and what these talks are. During the study periods, Trungpa Rinpoche would speak at night. And he gave talks on the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana every year. And in the next year, students who were admitted would study the previous year's transcripts and then come and he would carry on. He took people with whom he had personal relationship as students. So they all had connected to the Dharma through him. And these talks, I think you'll find, are quite profound. Trungpa Rinpoche was somewhat unusual in that when he gave beginning teachings, he gave them from a very advanced point of view. And so really, actually, there was a great teacher named Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was one of Trungpa Rinpoche's teachers and also his dear friend. And he, the highest teachings are called Ati, or Dzogchen, great perfection in Tibetan, Dzogchen and Sanskrit, Ati. And Dilgo Khyentse said of Trungpa Rinpoche that he taught the backwards path of Ati, meaning that he taught all these teachings from an Ati perspective, which is a much very more profound perspective than they might be given otherwise. So now we're going to start at the beginning, and Barry is going to lead off tonight. We're covering chapters 1, 2, and 3 of volume 1, called The Path of Individual Liberation. You should have received emails. You can buy this from Shambhala Publications with a 40% discount. You can also download the PDF of it, which is, it's up to you, for free from pdf.com, www.pdfdrive.com. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Barry. Barry, take it away.
Okay. Oh, right. There we go. And do this, do that. All right. I'd like to begin with a bow, just traditionally this gesture. So, welcome. This is a moment for me. It's been a long time since I've been in this on this seat, so to speak, and I feel that this is an auspicious occasion, actually, that here we are beginning at the beginning of the Hinayana, of these teachings, and especially for those of you who are new to it, we are embarking on a path of the Dharma, as he says, beginning at the beginning. And also for those of us who are returning to these teachings and still find them fresh, full of surprises and new understandings. These teachings, these elementary teachings, are never left behind. They stay with us. So to start with, I actually would like to depart a little from the text because since we're beginning at the beginning, I want to present the best pith overview of what the Dharma, Buddhism, is about briefly, and that is the legend of the Buddha, his enlightenment, and his first teaching. Because I keep coming back to it. There's a lot of points in there that are important. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but the person who later became known as the Buddha was an ordinary person, born into great wealth and privilege a couple hundred years BCE in northern India. And due to certain circumstances in his 20s, felt compelled to go on a spiritual quest. He left behind a family. He had a wife and a child. All of the wealth and comforts, he left all of that behind and spent the next couple of years diligently pursuing spiritual practices of the time, which were, as far as I know, all came from Hinduism of one sort or another, and usually had to do with deprivations of the flesh. And he applied himself wholeheartedly to this, and with great effort. And after a couple of years, he began to realize that this wasn't getting him there. This was not really the answer. And so he set off on his own. And legend goes, spent a long night sitting, meditating under a tree. And during that night, dealing with all of the different obstacles that arose. And eventually in the morning, woke up with the sunrise and walked into a new world in which everything had changed. The world hadn't changed, but he had. His experience had changed utterly. He was liberated from suffering, for one thing. And then he spent some time wandering in the forest. And I just imagine him, after having his mind totally blown, wandering in the forest going, holy moly, what now? Trying to make sense of this and what to do. Eventually, he encountered a few guys that he had been traveling and practicing with in the past. They could see that something had happened, that the guy, he was lit up. And they asked, what's up? What did you discover? What are you experiencing? And he declined because he didn't feel it was possible to adequately communicate what he was experiencing or any way of trying to teach it. But eventually he relented, and he did, and he gave the first teaching, what is referred to as the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. And that teaching is the Four Noble Truths. And they are, Noble Truth number 1, the truth of suffering. That we're all suffering. It's part of our lives. It's always there. Actually, a traditional, the first translation of this I encountered said, life is suffering. Noble truth number 2, the source of suffering is not in the external events. The source of our suffering is within ourselves. Noble truth number 3, therefore, since we create that suffering, it's possible to do something about it. And then noble truth number 4 is, here's how. Now, there's several important points in there. The last one being, here's how, is what we're doing right now. It's the Dharma. But also, the important points I picked up on are that, first of all, he was an ordinary person. He was not the product of virgin birth or blessed in any way. He was a guy. That he was able to achieve enlightenment despite that. That in order to achieve, this is point number 3, I guess, in order to achieve that enlightenment required a lot of effort over a period of time. He had to apply himself diligently. And finally, that he had to find his own way. And that this long night of meditation was possible only because he had put in the work leading up to that. So I think this is a good introduction to the Buddha Dharma, because that's what we're going to find here as we go along through these teachings. Now, I've got to do something. Right, hold on to this. Where is my brains? Wait a second. Okay. Well, all right. Okay, hold on. And sorry, I have to go find my stuff here, my notes. So let's get on with it. He begins at the beginning. In order to understand the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, we have to begin at the beginning. And the way to begin at the beginning is with the Hinayana, the path of individual salvation. Okay, clear enough. The Hinayana is called a smaller vehicle, he says, because it is simple it is not simple-minded or lacking in vision, but because it is pragmatic, deep-rooted approach. In other words, this is real life stuff. And what we're dealing with here are very real and immediate experiences of life. And he goes on, Hinayana is like building a castle on a rock. It takes great vision as well as great discipline and practicality. Without this deep-rooted approach, it would be like building a castle on ice. I think this is fairly clear, but it's worth remembering because there can be an attitude that, like, okay, the Hinayana teachings are kind of like the beginner things, and then you don't have to take them that seriously, or you can sort of go through it quickly. But actually, without a good understanding of these things, without this foundation, it's too easy later on to kind of wander off into the weeds of delusion and absorption and samsara, for that matter. So he says, everything is very direct and precise. It is a straight and narrow path. The Hinayana notion of the absence of frivolity plays an extremely important part of the Buddhist path. Therefore, there is a need for reverence and respect for the understanding of the Hinayana. Now he says, Buddhism says that confusion has to be dispelled and that there should be realization beyond confusion. That is based on the idea of transcending the highest ideals of the human mind completely, which is called enlightenment. Transcending the highest ideals of the human mind. In other words, this is not about belief. In fact, the whole path, he is very explicit about this, is not theistic. There are no fixed beliefs. You don't have to believe in something. Once you dissolve, once your particular expectations dissolve, that is liberation or enlightenment. Since enlightenment is based on dissolving the ego and its expectations, it has been said that you cannot watch your own burial. You cannot congratulate yourself on becoming the first Buddha of the age or the first Buddha of New York. This notion of dissolving the ego and dissolving the self is kind of right here. We're starting to see a little bit of what John was talking about, that this is it's the Hinayana from the Vajrayana point of view. The Hinayana is important for our journey because we have a body, our neuroses, our state of mind, our state of being, our habitual patterns, and it is necessary to work with all of these things before we can go further on the path. That we're not trying to escape that stuff. And this is not about finding some way of achieving some trance state or something where these things, fade away into white light. No. It's about really becoming present. It's about waking up so that we can really start to see these things for what they are. And that makes the situation workable. He says we should not be too ambitious and reject what is around us. I guess that's what I was saying. Moreover, the Hinayana is important because with the Hinayana, we begin to see our experience as literal experience. If we put salt on our meal, when we taste the salt, we taste the salt. In other words, it's just that simple. Without all of the commentary. Salt. Is this too much salt? Not enough salt? Is salt healthy? No. It's that experience of just the taste right there on the dot in the moment. In studying the Dharma, we have to understand what we are doing. He goes on with an analogy about a baker baking bread, and it's really an expansion of what we just went over, that you really need to see everything that's going on. According to the Hinayana, life is painful with an occasional speck of pleasure. We are born, we get old, we experience sickness, and last but not least, we die. We are each waiting to die. I'm afraid that is the bad news. Whether you are young or old doesn't make much difference. Everybody will eventually die. So, guess what? First noble truth, truth of suffering. So now is the time to do something with your life, right? We are not interested in developing eternity or immortality or in preventing being sick or being born. We are interested in doing something while we are alive, while we are breathing, while we can see the beauty of the snow, the flowers, the blue sky, the sunshine. And what he's presenting right here is the enlightened view that's there for all of us. Life is like a stew, he says. Everything is mixed together, which may or may not work. This mixture is called samsara. And here he gives the Tibetan, and I'm not going to attempt to give the Tibetan and its etymology here because I'm not confident about my ability to pronounce it correctly. But like a stew, I like that. Samsara is like a stew. It's like all of this stuff that's going on, all of these preoccupations, all of the habitual patterns of our thoughts and beliefs and regrets and dreams and desires, and it's a stew. Samsara is not necessarily bad, but it makes us dizzy. We have no idea whether we're going east, south, west, south, or north. Samsara is like the epitome of a hallucinatory drug, a super LSD, as it were. But we are in samsara, whether you like it or not. And this, what he's describing here, is confusion, which is another way that we speak of samsara. It's confusion that we're just not seeing clearly. The Dharma shows us the possibility of getting out of samsara. Third noble truth. So-called enlightenment is possible. You can do it. You can learn about it and you can do it. Enlightenment is like witnessing the brilliant sun for the first time in the morning. It is like seeing the beautiful flowers that grow in the woods, the frolicking deer, a bird flying proudly, fish swimming. Life is not all that grim. In the morning when you brush your teeth, you can see how shiny they are. Reality has its own gallantry, spark, and arrogance. You can study life while you are alive. You see, this is the thing, that just doing this practice of study, contemplation, and meditation, as we begin to learn to quiet the mind, things become more vivid. All of us in our life have had moments, sparks, of real vivid experience where something just takes your breath away. But then we get busy thinking about it and it fades. What he's describing here is the enlightened experience. So, I lost track of where I was. Okay, here we go. So Dharma is like the atmosphere. You cannot escape it. This I was a little puzzled about. And I think he's referring Dharma in the sense that it is everything that is occurring. John may have a thought about that. According to the Dharma, delusion is not regarded as catastrophic. and bewilderment is not regarded as terrible. Nonetheless, we are stuck with it. The Buddha said that all human beings experience bewilderment. You need to hear that particular bad news, but please don't be startled, because you can do something about it. However, nobody is going to do it for you. You have to begin by yourself, or maybe you should be startled. You should be shocked when you realize that you have been trapped and imprisoned in samsara, because then you might do something about it. You have been too naive. You have enjoyed your samsaric life too much. You should have been shocked a long time ago. I'm sorry. I'm the one to bring you this bad news, although quite possibly, quite remotely, I might also be bringing the potential of good news. But to begin with, you have to experience what reality begins at home. In fact, in your own basement. I have to say that I really enjoy reading his teachings many times just for these unexpected presentations that he has. So we must begin in the basement, he says. And this chapter is called The Frozen Space of Ego. And it's a good image for samsara, actually, that samsara is where ego rules. And it is a frozen space. It's a space in which things, we're trying to make everything stay put. Things we like, make them stay the way they are, try to make other things be the way we want them to be, and there's not much room to breathe in there. With any kind of spiritual practice, he says, you need to have a basic understanding of where you were starting from, where you were going, what you're working with. Simple enough. If you do not know that basic ground, there is no point, because your ideas become mere fantasy. So that's again the importance of having respect for these teachings. Your ideas can become mere fantasy. Although you may hear about advanced ideas and experiences, your understanding will be based purely on your own expectations and desires. And it is a weak aspect of human nature to always want to see and hear something colorful and extraordinary. And it's quite common. As a matter of fact, I have experienced encountering some charismatic guru or leader or something and getting captured by the idea that, yeah, this is it. I can, there's this kind of notion that if I just do this secret thing, this secret practice, that boy, I can just be there in a convertible with a top-down wind in my hair, driving all the way into enlightenment, just like that. And no, nope. And he says it is not fair to people to perpetrate their weaknesses, their expectations, and their dreams. And I was a little confused by this, but I think he's talking about people who do present these kinds of dreams, fantasy teachings. It is better to begin with the realistic starting point of what they are, what your experiences are. So before we speak of liberation or freedom, we need to discuss the basis of the path, which is confusion. It is important to begin by considering the development of what in Buddhist tradition is called ego. Ego is a big topic, and it's recurring. You're going to be hearing it again and again. It's also confusing. This may sound pejorative, but we do not have to be alarmed of what we are. Although our background may not be particularly enlightened, peaceful, or intelligent. It is good enough. You can work with it. So, now we're getting down to brass tacks, you might say. That this next section, the development of ego, is actually starting to get under the hood, you might say. It's a description of the actual process that takes place. Because we all have these moments of open awareness. And what we're getting into now is what happens that leads to samsara. So, in the development of ego, at the beginning, there is basic ground, basic consciousness or open space. There is openness, freedom, spaciousness all the time. For example, in everyday life, at the first moment we see an object, there is a sudden recognition without logic or conceptualization. And this, again, is something that we all experience. Not that infrequently. There's that moment of recognition, right? You're just here, and then there's kind of a spark. And then you're seeing something. A bird flies by outside the window. And there's a moment of just simple recognition. There it is. And in that instant, you know what it is. But then you start working on it. Oh, that was a bird. Oh, that was a beautiful bird. Oh, I wonder where he went. I wonder if I'll see him again. What can I do about it? Can I get my camera out quick enough to, we're not there anymore. In that first moment of actually directly perceiving what's happening, that is what he's talking about here, with a basic ground of consciousness, of open space. But he goes on here, but ultimately we panic and we hurry to try to put something into that openness. We try to find a name or a pigeonhole so that we can locate and categorize that particular thing according to our own ideas and conceptualizations. And this process continues. The ego becomes more and more solid. However, the idea of ego as a solid, ongoing entity is illusory. It is a mistaken belief. Although a confused mind would like to view itself as solid, it is only a collection of tendencies and events. This collection is referred to as the 5 skandhas. I'm just pausing because it's easy for me to start going on and on about some of this stuff, but I think I should just go ahead. So, the 5 skandhas. The first skandha is form. And he says solidifying space. So in the beginning, there is open space belonging to no one, and within that space is primeval intelligence or vidya. So there is both intelligence and space. It is like a completely open and spacious room in which you can dance about and not be afraid of knocking anything over. You are this space. You are one with it, but you become confused. And this is very much, what we would say, a fruitional view. I mean, in a lot of this, I believe he's describing his experience of actually residing in open space. Because it is so spacious, you begin to whirl, dance about, you become too active. And he goes on that at some point, it is no longer space, it has become solid space because of your unnecessary urge to contact it. When you try to cling to space, to grasp it, the whole perspective is completely changed. You've solidified space and made it tangible. See, that's one of the paradoxical things about the practice, is that trying to become enlightened doesn't work. Trying to quiet your mind doesn't work. You've become self-conscious that you are dancing in space. This is the birth of the first skandha, the skandha of form. And here is also the birth of this notion of I, this self. Having solidified space, you forget about what you have done. Now, this description here, just going to read it, but suddenly there is a blackout, a gap, your intelligence suddenly collapses, you are completely overwhelmed by ignorance, in a kind of reverse enlightenment experience. When you wake up, you become fascinated with your own creation, acting as if you had nothing to do with it, as though you yourself were not the creator of all this solidity. And the thing is that what we experience as just what is what, what this body is, what life, what's going on. That all of this is not really what is. It's our take on it. It's something that is produced within us. More on that later. You deliberately ignore the openness and intelligence, so the luminous quality of space becomes static. There is still primeval intelligence, or vidya, but it has been captured and solidified. Therefore, it has become avidya. So the vidya, negates it. That blackout of intelligence is the source of the ego. From that sudden blackout, as you continue to explore, gradually things become more and more solid. And then here are 3 stages of ignorance. If you're not already aware, we're going to be encountering a lot of enumerated lists of things here in Buddhism. And as far as I know, what this comes from is the fact that the Buddhist teachings were not written for a couple of hundred years after the era of the Buddha, that it was a oral transmission. And so to assist with remembering this stuff, we have nice numbered lists. So here's 3 stages of ignorance. We're still in the skandha of form. The skandha of form has 3 stages. The first stage, birth of ignorance. It's a kind of chemical reaction in which you come to the conclusion of your own separateness. It is as if there were a desert. Oh, I love this. A desert, simple and basic, but strangely and suddenly, one of the grains of sand popped up and began to look around. Love this. The second stage is called the ignorance born within. Having noticed that you are separate, you feel that you have always been so. However, that instinct towards self-consciousness is awakened. You feel unbalanced, so you try to secure your ground and create shelter for yourself. Take the attitude that you are a confused and separate individual, and that is all there is to it. And the third stage of ignorance, self-observing ignorance. As you are watching yourself, you see yourself as an external object, which leads to the notion of other. This is interesting, actually, that you see yourself as an external object. You hear this in a lot of people's speech, or even in our own thoughts. Boy, I just did this or that, or I am going to, who are we talking to? So you begin to create the world of forms. And I would like to offer this, just that Don't get too hung up on trying to memorize every one of these enumerated lists and categories and definitions. If you're good at that, great. But otherwise, just take it in as it comes. So the remaining skandhas. The second skandha, feeling. Having managed to transform space into solidness, you would then like to possess it, grasp it. Having solidified the duality of self and other, you try to feel the qualities of that other in order to reassure yourself that you exist. And this is where the three poisons come from, right? Passion, aggression, and ignorance. That once you have solidified the sense of self and then other, then of course, that other, whatever it is, person, event, anything, you then evaluate it. Is this something desirable that I want to bring closer? Is it something not desirable that I want to push away? Or is it something I can just ignore? That's passion, aggression, and ignorance. You think that if you feel something out there, then you must really be here. The mechanism of feeling you set up is very efficient. And the third skandha is perception or impulse. In the act of perception, having received information about the outside world from the skandha of feeling, see, you're feeling it out. You respond to that information in three ways: by drawing in, pushing away, or being indifferent. Well, actually, here's the three poisons. The skandha of feeling transmits its information, and you make judgments. You react. Whether you react for or against or indifferently is automatically determined by this bureaucracy of feeling and perception. If you find the situation threatening, you push it away. Find it seductive, you draw it, etc. And the fourth skandha, concept formation. The automatic, you see, this is, if we were able to really slow the mind down and actually be aware in those moments and drew it out, this is what we would see. We would be able to, it is possible to actually observe this process. The automatic reaction of the third skandha is not enough of a defense to protect your ignorance and guarantee your security. In order to protect and deceive yourself properly, you need intellect, the ability to name and categorize things. With intellect, you can label things good, bad, beautiful, ugly, and so on. With each of the skandhas, the structure of ego is gradually becoming heavier and stronger. Up to this point, ego's development was purely based on action and reaction, but from this point on, the ego is becoming more sophisticated. You begin to experience intellectual speculation, to confirm and interpret yourself. The nature of intellect is quite logical, and your obvious tendency is to use that logic to create a positive condition for yourself. You use the intellect to confirm your experience, to interpret weakness as strength, to fabricate security, and so on. And then, finally, the fifth skandha, consciousness. The last stage of the development of ego is consciousness. Okay. I have this thought that ego, the way it is used, can be confusing, and it certainly has been for me, because it's presented as if there is this thing, ego, that has volition and has intent, and because it's spoken of that way. But at the same time, we're told that it doesn't exist. And so one way to think of ego is it's a way to kind of personify the kind of tendencies, the way our minds operate, the way the samsara it develops. And so it's a convenient way to think about all that stuff. But ego doesn't actually exist. So anyway, finish up. I don't know what time is like, I guess. I'm running late. The last stage of development of ego is consciousness. Consciousness is the amalgamation of the intuitive intelligence of the skandha of feeling, the energy of the skandha of perception, impulse, and the intellectualization of the skandha of concept or formation. That concept produces thoughts and emotions. So at the level of the fifth skandha, we find emotional upheavals, uncontrollable and illogical patterns of discursive thought. With the development of discursive thoughts and fantasies, the whole thing is completely secured. And I'm going to wrap it up right there because I'm realizing that I'm out of time. So got to pass it along to John.
Okay. I'm going to say a few more things about the doctrine of egolessness and ego. First of all, this is the term in Sanskrit was Atman, and it refers to, most sometimes translated as soul or self. In Hinduism, Atman is a permanently, eternally existing entity that each one of us has, and it migrates and eventually merges with Godhead, which was called Brahman. So Atman, what one of the fundamental doctrines of Buddhism, and we're going to come to this in chapter 3 now, is the doctrine that Atman doesn't exist. Trungpa Rinpoche, when we believe in an Atman, a self, an I, that's what we call it, I. And so Trungpa Rinpoche called it ego, taking the Freudian term. It was actually from the Latin. Ego is the Latin for I am. And he coined the term egolessness, which is his translation of the Sanskrit anatma. Anatma means no Atman. And he coined it, in fact, if you refer to the Oxford English Dictionary, which is an etymological dictionary, giving you the source of words, it attributes egolessness to Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. He invented the term egolessness. There's a translation for the Sanskrit anatma. And it's one of the core, if not the core doctrine of Buddhism, that there is no I, that I is a myth. And that the five skandhas are an explanation on how this error occurs and is elaborated. It might interest you to know that when a human being is born, they are born at the level of the third skandha, an infant. And that is the level of impulse. An infant has feelings about the things that it perceives external to itself, and it reacts impulsively. So it desires this mother's breast. It cries when it's in pain. These are impulses of desire and aversion. And the third impulse, which is stupidity or ignorance, or it's called ignorance, but ignorance is a bad term for it. Ignorance is a word that is usually applied to the fundamental non-enlightenment, avidya. Avidya, by the way, literally means not seeing. Not seeing what? Not seeing this space of reality. We ignore it, we concretize it, we make it into a thing, when in fact
It's not. It's open space that we live in, which is full of these appearances which are arising and passing away, these visual things which are constantly changing, these sounds, all of the sense objects, thoughts, mental events are all passing through this space like images in a mirror, like reflections on water. These are the traditional tropes for describing these things. So an infant, when it's born, is born at the level of the third skandha. It already has ignorance. It already has impulse, feeling and impulse, and it's reacting impulsively at the level of the third skandha. Eventually, it starts to realize that it needs a more efficient way of dealing with the world in this sort of impulsive impulse. And I remember when my first daughter was a toddler, and she was wandering around in the kitchen and she touched the stove, which was hot, and it gave her pain and she cried. And her mother said, hot, pointed to the stove like that and said, hot. And after that, whenever my daughter would wander in the kitchen, whether the stove was on or off, it didn't matter, she would point to it and say, hot. She learned how to categorize that danger. And that's the level of the fourth skandha. The level of the fifth, which is consciousness. Consciousness is translated as vijnana. That's the Sanskrit for it. And what it means is that at the level of the fifth, the concepts that we have developed in the fourth skandha, like hot, and we develop very, very complex systems of conceptual designations. And the energy of the third, which is the push-pull of impulse, push it away, draw it to me, ignore it. Those are combined together, concept and those energies, and they become the full-blown emotions of the fifth skandha, and we are a fully developed, confused, sentient being. And this is the full picture of ego, and we could go over and over it as you will over the years. Chapter 3, which is called the Path of Individual Salvation. The word for this in Sanskrit is pratimoksha, this path of individual salvation. And individual salvation in Tibetan is soso tarpa. Tarpa means liberation and soso means individual. And really what we're doing in this stage is we're developing our ability to rest in tranquility and stop committing actions harmful to others. This is the twofold thrust of this stage of the path, that we begin to find a way out of the suffering in our minds. And how do we do it? Through the practice of tranquility meditation. And at the same time, we begin to develop the ability to stop being of harm to other people. We also, one of the key features of this stage, this first stage of the path, is that we become inspired by the Buddhist path. And so we make a commitment to ourselves, really, by taking the refuge vow. The refuge vow is not that we're seeking protection, but we are making a commitment, and we are taking refuge in the Buddha as the example of a human being, that's just like you or me, who achieved enlightenment, and that we can do it too. We take refuge in the Dharma, the teachings. That means we take them as the instruction and our inspiration on the path. And we take refuge in the Sangha as the community of fellow travelers, you might say, with whom we're walking. And the Sangha is a community of people who walk alone together. That is, that we each are responsible for our own paths. And when we walk alone, if someone stumbles next to us, we can give them a hand. We don't all go down because we're leaning on each other. One of the key Hinayana teachings is that this path is non-theistic. One of the first things I ever heard Trungpa Rinpoche say that really jolted me, it was at Karmi Choling, what is now called Karmi Choling. It used to be called Tail of the Tiger Meditation Center in Barnet, Vermont. It was 1970, and a film crew, a couple of guys, hippies, like we all were, came down from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation to interview this exotic individual, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And they got him out on the front lawn in front of the house, and one of them had a shoulder-mounted camera, and the other had a tape deck hanging from his shoulder with a microphone in hand. And he said to him, Trungpa Rinpoche is a Buddhist. He was interviewing him. He said, as a Buddhist, what do you believe in? And Trungpa Rinpoche responded, as a Buddhist, I don't believe in anything. And this is a key feature of Buddhism. It's not about beliefs. It's about experience, exploring our experience and learning from it. Words, doctrines, teachings are what are called relative truth. Experience is absolute truth. Relative truth words are pointers to experience. They are labels for it. That's what concepts are from a Buddhist perspective. It's as though I were to take a piece of paper and write the word desk on it and tape it to my desk. That's what words are. The desk is full of color and shape and all kinds of texture and has a hardness to it that is all of which is experiential. The word desk is a tag, and in fact, words are called tags in Tibetan. So theism is another conceptual system, and Buddhism says it's just not part of our path. Theism is useful if you want to believe in yourself, because if God is there, then I am here, and we're in relationship, the I-other relationship. And this is one of the reasons that Buddhism says it's non-theistic. Buddhism is not atheistic. Atheism is another belief. It's the belief that God does not exist. And Buddhism eschews all beliefs. It's all about examining and becoming aware of and understanding our immediate experience. So Buddhism would not be atheistic either. It's not theistic, it's not atheistic, it's something altogether different. And in fact, that's what is meant when Buddhism is referred to as the middle way. It's the middle way between belief and not belief. It's a way that's utterly different from either one. So it's a non-theistic path. He says you need to let go of theism, at least while you're practicing Buddhism. A belief in an external deity who might save or punish you, all of which has to do with ego aggrandizement. It's all about me, I, and where am I going? To salvation. That out there proves that I am here. And giving up theism, he points out, does not mean that we give up magic. The world is full of magic, the real world. It does mean becoming more sane, solid, and calm. And as we do that, and as we come into awareness of this present moment now, here, we become aware of the beauty and the magic and the power of the phenomena that is arising and passing away in the present moment. It teaches 3 types of learning: Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna. Shila is the word for discipline, and he says it means trusting oneself, that you can trust that you can evaluate and decide what works for you from the teachings as they are presented by a teacher. And that is the ultimate trust in your own intelligence. Samadhi means the practice of meditation, a way to relate to your life, relate your life to the spiritual path. And it involves meditation, which is called dhyana in Sanskrit. Meditation there are 2 main types of meditation on this path. In Sanskrit, the first is called shamatha. The Tibetan for it is shine, and it means abiding in peace. And the second is called vipassana in Sanskrit. hlaktung in Tibetan, and it means the development of awareness. Shamatha has to do with focusing your mind one pointedly on an object, and it has three virtues. First, you get a rest by coming back. You see, all thought is about the past and the future, and all thought is lit with anxiety, tension, wishing things were otherwise, hoping things will be otherwise, unhappiness. Even when it's happy, it has the faint tinge of unhappiness in there, like you're going to lose the happiness. So all thought is anxious and stressful. And when we come back to one pointed awareness on an object in shamatha meditation, we get a rest. One teacher I know said it's like having a really good nap. The second virtue of shamatha is that we, in trying to come back to one pointed awareness on an object, we begin to realize the extent to which we're lost in thought, which is a lot. It's slightly horrifying. It's called monkey mind. That's one of the names for it. The third benefit of shamatha is that we begin to develop the muscle of recognizing when we are lost in thought and of coming back to awareness of something in this present moment. The classic shamatha meditation is one-pointed awareness of the breath coming in and going out. But you can do it with anything. Buddhists call this the common practice. It's held in common with the Hindu tradition, where, for instance, transcendental meditation, where you're meditating on a mantra, a sound, that's shamatha, one-pointed focus on an object. You can do it on a candle flame. You can do it on an image. It's just focusing your mind one-pointedly. Vipassana incorporates shamatha, the aspect of shamatha of coming back from dreams into awareness in the present moment. But now, instead of just being aware of one thing, we're aware of our whole environment. So, for instance, you wouldn't want to practice shamatha, one-pointed focus on an object, while you're driving your car. You could have a serious accident if you're focusing on the breath while you're driving your car. But Vipassana, you come back into this present moment and your awareness is wide, it's panoramic, it's spatial. So you could actually drive your car better. And we practice both. This is what we do, what we teach, and it was taught to us by Trungpa Rinpoche as a hybrid shamatha and Vipassana. And it's what we practice when we practice together. So that's samadhi. Samadhi means that we are developing the ability to rest in awareness, either shamatha, vipassana, or the hybrid of both of them. And finally, the third wheel of learning, the three types of learning, they're called the three wheels actually, is prajna. And prajna is intelligence that you develop through study and practice. It in its ultimate meaning, it means clarity of seeing things beyond any conceptual designation, seeing things as they are, beyond good and bad, hope and fear, names, anything, just clear, sharp seeing. And at a lower level, it refers to our study of the Dharma. We study these teachings like we're doing right now, and we develop what's called the view. The view is the intellectual understanding of how things can be described in a more true way. And the view leads us into a non-conceptual understanding eventually. So there are four marks of existence of the view, the four things that are studied in the view. The first two are impermanence and suffering, and these have to do with samsara. Samsara, which Barry mentioned, literally means a wheel turning, korwa in the Tibetan. It's kind of like you're chasing your own tail around and around. And in fact, the symbol for samsara, for korwa, is a snake that is in a circle, biting its own tail, going around and around. That is the symbol for confusion, suffering. And impermanence is the other major mark having to do with suffering, that all things are passing. The second two, which have to do with awakening into Buddhahood, ultimately, are egolessness and the fact that ego doesn't exist, that it's a myth, and nirvana, peace. So let's go with permanence. Take a look at that. All things are impermanent. Once there's a story David Chadwick tells in his biography of Suzuki Roshi, Crooked Cucumber, right in the beginning of the book, that he once asked Roshi if he could sum up the essence of Buddhism in just a couple of words. Didn't think Roshi would do it. Roshi said, everything changes. The essence of Buddhism, impermanence in time and space, everything is constantly changing, instant by instant, so thoroughly that you can't even point to what it was that changed because it was already gone. Just like this gesture. It arises and it passes. This is called in Tibetan mitakpa, it's the word for impermanence, that nothing endures. Everything is subject to decay into something else or ultimately into nothingness, including us. And I wish I had printed it out. Maybe I did. Hold on a second. No, I refer you to a poem that I've loved over the years, Shelley's Ozymandias. And it's about a traveler in the desert coming across a broken statue, huge statue lying in the sand. And there's a head with a beard, and then there's a pedestal. And on the pedestal it says, "Here is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Tremble all you who pass by here." And of course the winds are blowing and the sand is covering the statue and there's nothing else around. The utter vividness of impermanence. The second mark is of suffering. And there are three types of suffering. He talks about one version. Let's see, that does he talk about it here? Well, the three types that I'm familiar with are this, that three types of suffering is, one is not getting what you want, getting what you don't want, and the third is the general malaise, the feeling of that the world is not what we would like it to be, that we wish that things were otherwise, and it's just a continual ongoing feeling of depression and unhappiness. The word for it in Tibetan is duknal. Duk means wretched and nal means continuing. So it's the ongoing suffering resulting from the futility of creating anything permanent. You can't do it. Can't hold on to anything. Everything is constantly slipping through our fingers. And our lives are a fundamental nuisance, inconvenient, he says. The third mark is egolessness. And what this is, we have been talking about, the fact that this I, what we call an I, is just a fiction. It's a creation, a mental creation that is created momentarily, and there are huge gaps in it. And it doesn't really exist. It's a myth that the analogy gives. You see, the description of reality is one of space and intelligence combined. And one of the names for this is vidya. Vidya means seeing. Another is yeshe in Tibetan. Yeshe in Tibetan is vidya. Another in Tibetan is rikpa. And what it means is that we are in the midst of a space here which is lit with knowingness. The idea that I know is an add-on. It's an extraneous or an extra remark, because all the time we can't shut it off. We are in this space, and it is arising full of light, phenomena, sound, all of this. And the two, the knowledge and the space, are in union. The space is called dhatu in Sanskrit, yin in Tibetan, and the knowledge is called vidya in Sanskrit, yeshe in Tibetan. Yeshe means primordial knowing. Ignorance is when we begin to concretize this space and make it into a thing, and that's called not knowing, not seeing, vidya. So what happens is, magically, we don't know how, space becomes concretized. It is turned into a thing. It becomes solid. This is the beginning of the birth of ignorance. And that solid thing implies a perceiver of it. It's an implication. If that's there, then I, the I here, am here looking at it. So there's kind of a journey from that to this, from the thingness, which seems to arise magically. It's like every once in a while we concretize the world, and it implies a perceiver of that concrete world, which is me, I. Now we have a relationship, I and other. But the fact is that it only exists, this relationship, and the I and the other only exist as long as we're making this happen, as long as we're going from that to this. So we have to keep it going. We have to keep, I knows, is very insecure. It knows that it actually doesn't exist, but it keeps the game going by reaching out back to the other and saying, what are you? Are you there? Are you for me? Are you against me? Are you indifferent to me? And we set up a conversation going back and forth that keeps this whole illusion of I and other alive. As soon as we stop going back and forth, boom, we're here in space. In fact, there's no we who's here in space. There's just this intelligent, open space where enlightened people live. But ego wants to keep itself going. So it looks at the other and it says, are you for me, against me, or indifferent? These are the three poisons that Barry mentioned. The third poison is often called ignorance, but it's a bad term for it, and it's different in Sanskrit. The word for it in Sanskrit is moha, which is better translated, I think, indifference. And these are the three things three attitudes that I can have towards other. It's for me, against me, or I'm indifferent to it. The three poisons. Now, and if it's for me, well, I want to pull it to me. That's the third skandha, impulse. I'm going to pull it to me. If it's against me, if it's something that's inimical, I want to push it away. That's aggression. And if it's indifferent, then I don't care and I just leave it the same distance. And then, as I described, as a child, you begin to develop categories, labels for categorizing these different reactions to make it more efficient for ego. And you say, well, that's good, that's bad, this is indifferent, that's for me, that's against me, I don't care about it. And we begin to develop labels. This is hot stove, I'm not going to touch it. This is sweet, I'm going to eat it, whatever it may be. That's the fourth skandha. And then everything begins to get mixed up together, and we get the fifth skandha, which we're going to talk about later, where we get the full-blown emotional states that are depicted in the six realms being the God realm, the jealous God realm, the human realm, the animal realm, the realm of the deprived beings called hungry ghosts, and the hell realm. And these depict the full-blown emotional states of ego, ranging from blissful pride for the gods down to hatred and fear in the hell realm. And this is the fifth skandha. Finally, the fourth mark of existence, sometimes there are only three, sometimes they're called fourth, is peace. And this is the freedom from defilement, which I've talked about to you. It takes place in many ways and stages. The first stage is just the simple development of shamatha, of the peace that you get from one-pointed focus on an object in meditation. He says, it has nothing to do with pleasure. It is non-aggression. Nothing takes place. We simply quiet down. Things become very clear. It refers to an absence of chaos. It transcends any beliefs or fixations or ideas, this peace. The rug of pain and fixation is pulled out from under your feet, he says. And so we give up our search for individuality because we're just focused on an object. We're aware. We have given up going back and forth, and we're resting here in awareness. We begin to realize that we find peace in a sense of real existence and genuineness. This is the path. More and more, we come back into this space of awareness right here, giving up the I other. And when we do, we are living in a world where the color of the phenomenal world and the space in which everything arises and passes are in unity. It's like a mirror, images passing through the mirror. It's like your computer screen with pixels going across it and creating images and sounds coming out of it. He calls the constant struggle to cover up what we've done and what we might do. That means our constant effort to make things right in a dualistic way, I and other, to try and make things, maybe we want to have a better dinner, we want to have a better life. He calls it a cosmic cheating game, and this could be avoided. We don't have to struggle so much. We don't have to torture ourselves. We can come back into simple awareness and rest here. But we have to find out who we are, ultimately. And that is that we are awake, Buddha, enlightened already. We've just lost track of it. We've gotten absorbed in this game of ego, I, other, and keeping it going. He says that in order to do this, to achieve enlightenment, to wake up from this game of ego, it takes ambition, but at the same time, it is very simple and natural because wakefulness is not an effort. Isn't that interesting? Wakefulness is complete, utter effortlessness. We are giving up effort. Effort is all about achieving something for me. When we begin to give that up, we begin to come back into the effortlessness of being awake here and now. And he says this is delightful. And we're giving up our ape-like struggle, which needs maintenance. Your fundamental style of being awake does not need any maintenance. It comes about completely naturally. So the path is about coming back to what we have always been. Sometimes it's described as coming home. We're already there. So this chapter ends with a couple of sections. The first is becoming one with the Dharma. It's overcoming heedlessness, perversion, and laziness, as well as aggression, tiredness, and neurosis. In this case, the Dharma becomes your entire life. It becomes one with it. You can hardly even see it because it becomes everything. Includes all obstacles and difficulties, all the passions. It includes everything you experience, everything that occurs. You're totally in the Dharma all the time. resting here in this awareness right now. You're looking at your computer screen, you're aware of your bottom on the chair or wherever you happen to be sitting. This awareness, we come back to it, it's total. And it becomes the total intelligence. It becomes everything that we have to work with in our lives, and an expression of our creativity and our happiness. He says, you become totally in the Dharma all the time, and this produces tremendous joy. And then he says, speaking for himself, whatever he does, he feels he is at the service of others. Because when one comes back into this nowhere that's everywhere, there's nothing to do but be responsive to others. And when you see others suffering, you're entirely motivated to try and help them. There's tremendous love in coming back into this space in the present moment, tremendous enjoyment, because this space is beautiful. And the phenomena that rise and pass away in it are beautiful, vivid, colorful. He says, if you are a practitioner of Buddha Dharma, you don't take time off, you don't take a break. So everything is brought onto the path. You're being softened, mainly by the mindfulness of shamatha, sitting and coming back into the present moment, and by vipassana, both of them being psychological and physical. Your posture, you're sitting like a rock. Your mind is coming back into the present and resting here effortlessly. The only effort in meditation, whether it's shamatha or vipassana, is when you realize that you've been dreaming and you say, no, I'm going to come back. And there's a slight moment of effort there. But when you come back to whatever it may be, to awareness of the breath, to awareness of this space, it is effortless. Finally, the purpose of Hinayana discipline is to attain cessation in the sense of no longer struggling. A marvelous experience. It produces doubtlessness, harmony, tranquility, and wholesomeness, because you're able to sit physically or mentally and meditate in that way. You're able to liberate yourself from pettiness and wishful thinking and have tremendous freedom, the freedom to rest here in awareness with whatever you happen to be doing. He says practice should have a sense of delight. It's completely secular, not at all religious. There's no religion in this. It's just about one's experience. And then I'm just going to read this. He says, when the gong strikes and you begin your meditation practice, notions of ought or ought not, should or shouldn't, notions of punishment or of being a good boy or a good girl automatically begin to come up. You start to think, oh, I should be a good meditator. Oh, I'm not, my mind is not here. I'm going to try and be better. He says you have to become, you need not let go of such notions. You need to let go of such notions. You have to become completely ordinary and not associate what you're doing with religion. Holding on to religion produces guilt, and that produces negativity. And that means there's no joy in being a practitioner of the Buddha Dharma. So when you sit in meditation, these thoughts of ought and should, and I'm not doing it right, and oh, I'm having thoughts and I'm not being a good meditator, all that, let go of it. All of that is more ego. And just come back to simple awareness. As a practitioner, you could actually enjoy yourself. Your sitting posture might be difficult and painful to maintain. Nonetheless, there could still be enjoyment and upliftedness. Sitting practice could be a festivity, he says. You enjoy being decent, the best of human beings. The best of human beings for you means you're just being an ordinary human being. The Buddha was an ordinary human being, completely. And he looked out at us. I remember when he gave us that particular teaching, he said, the Buddha was such an ordinary human being. And he looked out at all of us and he said, you don't want to be an ordinary human being. You want to be extraordinary. And, yeah. He says, that's why the Buddha is referred to as Sugata. Sugata means the one gone beyond, gone to as it is, the one who has joyfully gone on the path, gone to as it is, gone to this, here, now, as it is, simple, gone to. Gata means gone to. The path is joyful, being a human being, being yourself, being a member of the Sangha is joyful. There's such freedom in it, of letting go of the shoulds and the shouldn'ts and the oughts and all the judgments, and of beginning to really appreciate, be here for one's life with intelligence and with heart and with openness. All of this develops on the path. Increased vividness of the world, that one begins to fall in love with the beauty of the world and with people. Enjoyment comes from the sense of things being truly what they are. And that produces great joy and greater joy of uncovering your Buddha nature, your inherent capacity for awakening, that we were Buddha all along, we just didn't know it. And he says, and you begin to develop a sense of humor. The first talk I ever heard him give, he had just arrived in the United States, early 1970. He came and spoke in New York. And I was searching and on paths and all kinds of things. And I went and sat in the audience pretty close up to where he was in full lotus. I could do that then to impress the guru. And of course, he came in wearing a suit and tie, which wasn't my idea of a guru, and accompanied by his wife, Diana, who was about 16 at the time, in a mini skirt. And I was trying not to look because I could see up her skirt to see her underwear. And I'm trying to be really holy. And he gave a talk about a sense of humor and the necessity for having a sense of humor on the path, because it lightens up ego, lets go of ego. And I just thought it was utterly not funny, that talk. And I wrote him off. Turned to Rinpoche. But chance brought me back. He says, finally, you begin to feel wholesome. Just one being, not divided. And at the same time, you also begin to develop tremendous power and strength to help others, which is delightful and wonderful. That is a true miracle. Wow, we're over time. So we can have a brief discussion, and then you're invited to come to the Wednesday night discussion group, which is, we're going to try and see how it goes, melding the two classes in the discussion group on Wednesday nights. It's right after the evening meditation. So if there are any people who would like to make comments, or so we could go a little late tonight, we'll try and be more careful next week. Any questions or comments? Can you see, Barry? I'm on an iPad and can't really do it.
No, I think everyone's been stunned into silence. Oh, wait, Terry has something.
I just wanted to share. I've heard about the five skandhas over and over throughout the years. I'm like, oh, here we go again, skandhas. But this time hearing it, actually some things kind of fell into place, and I really appreciated hearing the skandhas being described again. And perhaps it's because of some of the other teachings that I have been digesting recently. But I just wanted to share with anybody that has had that a similar response to hearing the description, and it feels so obscure and unhelpful. And then, at least for me right now, I just really feel like I benefited from reviewing it this time again. So that's all I have to say.
That's great.
Anyone else? If not, we'll probably end. Yeah, the 5 skandhas. It's a description of how we do it all the time. Complicate our minds and lose track of this fundamental awareness.
Well, maybe it's time to pack up and go home.
Okay. Who's going to lead the chants? And can you put them up, Barry?
Yeah, give me a sec here. Okay, it's here, it's here, and here we go.
Let's just do the dedication of merit.
Prayer for peace or just the dedication?
Well, if you've got them both there easily, we can do that.
I got them right here. I got everything. And so, whoops, where's it? Yes, here we go.
Should I lead it?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, John.